Greetings to all our learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. Dear learners, the topic of analysis is BRICS and the World Order. In the lecture, we shall analyze the evolution of BRICS, discuss the major summits, the contemporary challenges, and most important, while we are analyzing situating BRICS in the world governance and world order, we shall elaborate on role of India with respect to BRICS and the larger world governance thereof. Dear learners, it's very important to understand that BRICS is an important aspect of the world order. It is a reflection also of how there was an attempt to factor in globalization with respect to coming up with a political and economic arrangement at the global level. And today, with the challenges on globalization, the aspect of BRICS also is being debated. The term BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India and China, was coined by the chief economist of Goldman Sachs in 2001. Yes, learners, in 2001, the British economist Jim O'Neill coined the term BRIC, and this was in an attempt to describe the four major emerging economies of the then time 2001, Brazil, Russia, India and China. The context is important to understand. That is, it was an attempt to forecast global economy, the trends over the next half century. BRIC as a forum was formalized with the meetings of foreign ministers of the four countries on the margins of United Nations General Assembly in New York, September 2006. Dear learners, it's very important to also now situate the aspect of BRICS which got expanded with the inclusion of South Africa, that how BRIC states, when we look at the 5 individual states here, they comprise approximately 40% of world's population, and this also has a significant bearing on the world economy, because when you look at that how the BRICS countries account approximately for 22% of world's economy. Over the last decade, this loose coalition that emerged was seen to have evolved to become a formal partnership both on economic and political fronts. The first BRICS summit was held in Russia in 2009. When we go by the accounts of summits available with the BRICS office, we find that herein there was a consensus amongst the BRIC leaders, and what we find here is that the next year South Africa was invited to join the forum on 24 December 2010, and BRICS was formed. What we see here is that the coalition worked on a consensus that there were long-term economic gains and interests to be factored in by the partnership, and above all an attempt to reform the global governance and global order. The member countries, when we have a look, careful analysis at the member countries, we find that there are economic issues of mutual interest. They are all big countries, both in terms of area as well as population. Further, when we look at the challenges, all the member countries are facing similar challenges. There is a desire and aspiration that can be read in the actions and policy making decisions of the member countries, that they want to make proper use of their untapped economy and collaboration, mutual collaboration offers them a way to work out absolute gains. Further, when we look at the aspects that of the working of member countries, one can read that there is an aim, a mission to create an alternative global infrastructure both in economic and financial fields. Member countries, when we look at the historical evolution of the summits which we shall see now, one can see that there is a desire, a want to explore markets hitherto untapped in their region, as the countries are gateways into the macro regions. BRICS meetings, when we look at the meetings, one can read that the agenda has widened over the years to include, encompass topical global issues, that is climate change, sustainable development, energy security, health, global trading order, post-2005 development agenda, reforms in international economic and financial institutions, international and regional political developments. Further, what we see that the BRICS cooperation, when we look at the systemic perspective as to how the coalition has worked, one can see that this cooperation has been based on two pillars: consultation on issues of mutual interest through meetings of leaders like the ministers of finance, trade, health, science and technology, education, agriculture, communication, labor, amongst others. And then the second level, the political cooperation in a number of areas through meetings of we can see in working groups, senior officials of member countries. The first summit, when we look at the first BRICS summit, Russia 2009, here we find that economic and financial issues, wherein the context is important to be read, that is the 2008 financial crisis, reform of international financial institution, sustainable development, measures to combat climate change were on the agenda. The second summit at Brasilia, Brazil 2010 focused on identifying BRICS cooperation initiative and also included inputs from the civil society. The joint declaration from this summit focused on increasing the voting quotas of the BRICS within the IMF, fostering greater involvement of the choice, the visions of leaders for the IMF and the World Bank. With the admission of South Africa into the BRICS fold, the third summit that was there at China 2011, one can find that there was discussion on UN reform, the need to combat terrorism, economic cooperation. An action plan was worked out to increase and deepen areas of cooperation in multiple diverse fields such as health, science, technology, renewable energy, peaceful use of nuclear energy, eradication of hunger, and above all, emphasizing the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. The fourth summit, dear learners, that was held at New Delhi, India 2012, herein financial cooperation with third world countries through establishment of the BRICS Bank, that was for financing infrastructure needs and sustainable development projects of BRICS and other developing countries. The agreement was also signed to facilitate credit approval in local currencies for establishing and strengthening economies of the BRICS countries. Further, when we look at the fifth summit that was at Dublin, South Africa 2013, this lays the foundation for ushering the contingents reserve arrangement with an initial amount of $100 billion, adoption of the feasibility report for setting up BRICS Development Bank, establishment of two important centers, that is BRICS Business Council and BRICS Think Tank Council, and this was all done to encourage coordination, cooperation amongst the member countries. Dear learners, the sixth summit that was at Brazil 2014 was there on the agenda, and an important aspect of the sixth summit was to fund infrastructure and sustainable development projects in the emerging markets, and they were signing of the contingency reserve agreement, and therefore also for working out mechanisms to get cooperation together on a much sustained basis. The seventh BRICS summit, dear learners, that was at Ufa, Russia 2015. Herein there was a definite leap. One can see that how the process of ratification of constituting agreements of contingency reserve arrangement as well as new development bank, and above all with the consent of the banks. At the 8th summit, that was, dear learners, at Goa, India 2016. Here one finds that there is, with the change in narrative of the global scape, there is a change in narrative of the agenda also. Member countries strongly condemn terrorism in all forms and manifestation. Establishment of BRICS agricultural research platform, mutual cooperation between diplomatic, academics, regulation on customs cooperation committee were signed. So what we find here is that there was deliberation on the possibility of setting up an independent BRICS rating agency to be based on market-oriented principle in order to further strengthen the global governance architecture. The summit also forged new bridge between BRICS nations and BIMSTEC nations comprising India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Thailand and Myanmar. Now herein we also have to understand that with this evolution of BRICS, with the leap of agenda from one summit to the other, there are certain challenges also in front of BRICS. Let's now analyze the challenges. BRICS economies, when we have a detailed understanding of that, we find that they share common domestic and socio-economic challenges. Challenges demand need for independent thinking. Further, when we look at IBSA, which is another grouping of democracies established in June 2003, named after India, Brazil, South Africa, somewhere parallel groupings already at work definitely cast a doubt on the successful working of any forum. Then leadership role in facilitating the reform of global financial and political institutions is also an important challenge. The need to have better understanding of how to work out consensus, the way out amidst conflicting interests amongst member states, also needs to be understood. Then one has to see that there is lack of a binding ideology when we see in case of NATO or when we see in case of other alliances. BRICS somewhere lack a binding ideology. Then there, within this aspect of vacuum of ideology, there are bilateral differences, then diversity of member states in terms of their socio, cultural and political systems. To understand more on India and its BRICS dilemmas, an important reference for further reading for our learners is that I present, that is Harsh V. Pant and Rajkumar Sharma's work, BRICS India and its BRICS dilemmas. Dear learners, this is available at orfonline.com, 18th November 2019. The 11th BRICS summit, the contemporary one at Brazil, calls for strengthening the multilateralism, reforming global institutions, United Nations Security Council, World Trade Organization, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund. So what we see here is that economic agendas are there, but gradually the scope of the agenda has increased to include security, health, science and technology, culture, civil society, amongst others. Dear learners, the BRICS Summit 2020, the theme, as we read from various reported news in media, the theme is BRICS Partnership for Global Stability, Shared Security and Innovative Growth, further strengthening cooperation amongst the member states, and most important, the context what we see is this is happening amongst the prevailing COVID-19 crisis. So what we see that new development bank, the idea of BRICS countries, how it has approved loans for, when we see the contemporary reports for Mumbai Metro and for Ghaziabad Metro Meerut Regional Rapid Transport Project. So here what we see, again reading from newsonair.com resources, that how NDB was established by Brazil, Russia, India and China and South Africa to mobilize resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS countries. So what we see here is that how the partnership is being enhanced over the time. And again, what we see that the world governance with respect to BRICS, the context has to be read carefully, that with the disintegration of USSR, end of bipolar world, coming up of globalization, blurring up of space-time distinction, BRICS definitely proved a window for working out a new world order of multilateralism. And for looking at this context, it's very important to analyze that why for India cooperation with BRICS becomes important. So what we see here is that today when we look at food and energy security, terrorism, engaging with China, diversity in culture, geography, political systems, all of it in this aspect of emergence, of debates, of contours, of crises and challenges in the world order, India's engagement with BRICS becomes important. BRICS also, if we go by debates and research in the academia and media, it has been pointed out by several analysts that BRICS definitely holds a window of opportunity, a hope, a promise of greater understanding and cooperation amongst the member states. Then with this increasingly globalized world order, with this multipolar world order, with this aspect of multilateralism, so what we see here is the BRICS group, which was established in 2009, has evolved into a plurilateral summit institution recognized both by skeptics as well as proponents as a major participant in the international system. Dear learners, an important reference here which you must read, John Kirtan and Maria Latinova's edited work, BRICS and Global Governance 2018. Another important book by which we can take for further research and studies, Stephen Kanga, Cynthia Kilgony edited book, Global and Regional Leadership of BRICS Countries, Springer, November 2015. The book analyzes issues of the rising regional and global leadership of BRICS and puts forward an important analysis in terms of questioning of the willingness to take the lead, nature of trends in regional and global leadership within the context of a changing international order. Another important book, as we take into account the working of BRIC, we have to see that how over the period of time the challenges that are there for BRICS have indeed increased. The idea that was put forward has indeed magnified, and today it is all the more essential for nations, for countries to work out mechanisms in order to ensure that partnership is sustained. No doubt, in terms of a foreign affairs endeavor, BRICS engagements for its member states definitely adds more to their foreign policy apparatus. Further, it is also essential to see that how the agenda of security in international affairs has indeed increased. It is just not related to military perspective. There is gender, there is need for innovation, sustainability, economy, livelihoods. And to cater to this multi-dimensional perspective of security, BRICS definitely offer a window of opportunity to its member states for engaging better with world governance. So dear learners, when we look at BRICS, one has to look into account the changing contours of world governance, and within this changing contours of the world governance, how can member states engage with each other both at political as well as economic, social, cultural, economic, ecological, gender realms in order to ensure a much more holistic expression and definition of their national interests. Dear learners, hope the lecture today on BRICS and the world order gave you significant inputs on understanding the changing contours of world order and also understanding that how a loosely formed coalition, definitely with its own challenges, definitely with its own opportunities, has a lot to offer for its member states, and it is imperative on part of respective member states to factor in their due national interest in terms of working out the bigger picture of holistic expression of their national interest, with focus on working out modalities of factoring in absolute gains through meaningful coexistence. Thank you very much for being with us for the lecture on BRICS and world order.